learning about what is good and what we like about the places where we grew up. But not only that, it will also, I think, expand our perspective about the possibilities that exist, the different ways of living and doing that exist. And I think that expansion makes you a better informed person. I think being better informed means when it comes to making decisions for yourself, because you have that knowledge of how other countries do things, how other people live, how other people approach life and work and all that stuff, like you can draw from those experiences and make a decision that is, I think, sometimes a little bit more unique. Hello and welcome to another episode of Teaside Thursday with your artist friend Win. Before we get into this week's episode, I want to introduce to you what I'm drinking for this week's tea selection. So if you have watched my travel haul from Taipei and Fukuoka, you will have already seen this tea appear in that video. And that tea is Hojicha. So it's powdered Hojicha tea. And Hojicha is basically a roasted green tea that is then made into a powdered form. I believe that's what it is. If that information is incorrect, I will do a little bit of research and put it on the screen so that we can all be educated on what Hojicha tea actually is. Because to be honest with you, that is the extent of my understanding. And it can come in a leaf format or a powdered version, and I'm drinking the powdered version. And I'm so excited. It's the first time I've made this tea before ever. I've had it outside in a couple of cafes before, and I had 2 delicious cups of it in Japan, but I've never made it in my home, and I was able to use the electric whisk to actually make it into this frothy tea. And I use the same method as I did with matcha because I figured it's a similar consistency. It's pretty much made from the same ingredients. Thankfully, it did work. So I'm gonna take a little bit of a sip now before we get into this week's episode. Wow, this is unreal. Like, this tastes so good. This might even be like a deeper flavor profile than green matcha tea. It has that like earthy, smoky flavor, and there's a sweetness coming through, but I don't know if that is from the hojicha itself. I think more likely it's likely to be my soy milk that will already have, I think, a little bit of sweetness to it. If you haven't tried hojicha tea yet, I will highly recommend it. Oh my god, it's amazing. So today I'm in my comfy sweats. I've just freshly showered. I basically worked out in the gym this morning. I had like a lower body session, which was incredible, much needed to get like extra energy and extra frustrations and extra just emotions, like just outside of me, like just to process emotions with movement is so amazing. And now I feel grounded and I feel like I can be fully present with you in this conversation. And being able to do just like a full-on sort of session where I gave like 100% of my energy and focus on lifting some weights feels incredible. Let's dive into this week's episode. So In my little idea diary, which again, if you've seen my travel haul video, you would have seen this little guy pop up in the video. I have jotted down some episode ideas in this little book, and one of them that I wanted to talk to you about today is 3 key takeaways from traveling abroad. And this obviously is inspired by my recent travels to Taiwan and Japan. And I decided to stick to these 3 points, and I'm going to elaborate on them as I get into this episode. It's an interesting experience for me traveling abroad and having that experience of taking the plane journey from basically I set off from London to Taiwan and doing that by myself, not with a friend initially, not with my husband, but just, having a little bit of a solo travel time. I think traveling, especially long distance in my 30s, hits different to when I was traveling in my 20s. I don't know if it's because I'm just more self-aware than I used to be, but it made me think about the fact that when I was traveling in my 20s, I would be traveling because I was really excited about the place. But now, traveling in my 30s, especially to a completely new country with a completely different culture, makes me realize that this travel experience has hit me a little bit deeper than it used to. Like, it's no longer for me felt like, I was having that experience from like an external perspective. I don't know how best to describe it. I just feel like I value it a lot more. So, without further ado, let's just jump into the first point. The first point of my key takeaway in traveling abroad, especially long distance, is that I realized that I actually really like places that are very unfamiliar to me. So I always had this idea that I was a creature of comfort, meaning that, because I am an artist, because I can get overly stimulated sometimes, that, I need quiet spaces and I need spaces that allow me to think and recuperate and just allow me to have more silent periods in life. But the 2 cities that I went to this time were Taipei and Fukuoka. I believe that Fukuoka is the third largest city in Japan, and Taipei is, I think, the largest city in Taiwan. Granted, Taiwan is a small country, but both of these cities were to a scale that I've never experienced in my life. And I realized that I absolutely loved it. And I also really loved the fact that both countries spoke different languages than I do. Both countries have different cultures and different religions and just a different way of living than I do where I come from in both Myanmar and in the UK. And there was something about that really took me outside of my comfort zone. But at the same time, I found myself so present. Like, I found myself being willing to learn about their cultures, their religions, and their food. Like, I just found myself being immersed in this, sensory newness. After a certain point during my travel, I realized that the unfamiliar isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, I'd always thought of myself like as a person who loves being in the countryside, being in nature, but then I am confronted with these huge cities that are, alive until like midnight and have so much activity going on, like well into the evening. And I live in a place that is like super duper quiet. Like sometimes you might not even see like another soul on the street. And during the weekends, like it's so quiet that I don't know where my neighbors are and I don't know what everybody else is doing. And if it definitely is more of like an introverted environment. Whereas in these big cities, it was so like complete opposite. It was like extroverted. There was so much stimulation, so much life around me, and I realized that I survived, you know? Like I kept telling myself the story that I needed quiet, I'm a quiet person, but at the same time I felt so alive by these cities that it made me question this whole idea that I had about myself. It made me question this whole idea of these stories that I keep telling myself. And I realized throughout the trip that I'm actually more adventurous than I thought I was. And I'm actually someone who likes stimulation and who likes discovery and new experiences more so than I realized. Maybe you can relate to me in a sense where you might have told stories about yourself that are X, Y, and Z. Like you might be like, no, like I don't know, like complete opposite to me. Let's say like I'm a city girl, I love noise and I love stimulation, and I just have to be around people. But then if you put yourself in a completely different situation, I feel like this is where you learn the most about yourself, because you will be at your most almost like uncomfortable situation. And if you stay open to that new experience, whilst that new experience and that discomfort may not be forever, it's unlikely to be forever, it might actually give something back to you in a sense where you will learn and discover things about yourself that you can integrate into your life. I'm so proud of myself for being willing to go to two places that are so foreign to me. And I'm so proud of myself for experiencing new cultures and being open to new environments, because now I realize that I can handle more stimulation than I thought I did. And I am actually quite an adventurous person. And to be able to almost sort of develop this new identity within me, or at least like this new realization that crumbles down the old stories of who I thought I was, I don't know, like makes me feel a little bit more excited about life and a little bit more excited about the changes that are ahead of me. And it also makes me feel really confident in myself and more grounded in myself that I discovered something new. Maybe it's because I have already done this journey of immigration when my family and I traveled from Myanmar to England when I was 7 years old. But I think there is a part of me that still remembers taking like long journeys and still remembers going back to Myanmar like every summer holiday. So for me, like 13-hour flight feels very, very short. It feels like it goes by in just like a switch. And I found that even now, like the plane journeys coming back, I had to stop in Singapore for 8 hours. The flight from Fukuoka to Singapore was 6 hours. And then the flight from Singapore to London after my layover was 13 hours. And I believe that in total, coming back from Japan to London, it was in total, including my layover, about 27 hours of just being on the road traveling. And it didn't really faze me. At the same time, I think after a while, like you get to your own level of like comfort threshold. And I talked about it in previous Teaside Thursday episode about comfort levels. Like everyone has their own comfort level thresholds. And depending on your experience, you might not realize that you've already met your comfort threshold and you just need to do something like completely different and completely just, almost like throws you a little bit, where you are forced to kind of figure yourself out again. You're forced to kind of find your own grounding again. Because I do love making long journeys and because I do love like traveling in general, I never quite understood people like who stayed in their hometown or their home city or home place for like it's like so many years. I was talking to one of the gym owners in my gym, and we're having a conversation about just, where I lived in the UK. And I was listing out like the different cities where I lived. And I realized I've actually lived in like, I think like 5 different places in the UK. And he was saying that he's always been in Bath, like he's always been in this city, like he grew up here, he was brought up here. And I found myself asking him, like, so you never had the desire to leave? Like, you never had the desire to sort of go and explore, like, what else is out there? And he said that, someone once told him that if you don't leave Bath, like if you don't leave this city, by the time you're 30 years old, you'll never leave. And I don't know, like, I don't really like that saying though, because I kind of feel like it almost puts like a label on you, like whoever it was. I don't know if it put a label on him, but we're never too old and we're never too young to step outside of the edges of our comfort. And I think what traveling does is it does that in a very physical way. Like, there is no time to overthink. I think when you're in a new country that is completely different from what you've been surrounded by before, like all your life. Like, I felt like, I just had to kind of like be as present as I can, try to take in as much as I can, and try to be okay with all of these new experiences that was kind of flooding into me, like in a sensory way. So I hope that first point made sense. I'm sorry I rambled on a little bit, but somehow it seems I have more to say on this topic than I thought. I do think that often we will come back feeling a lot more confident and feeling a lot more energized, and also just feeling a lot more like you learn something about yourself, you learn something about the world around you. And I think that is priceless. Like, I think that experience is absolutely priceless. Oh my god, this tea gets better and better. I don't know how. So, the second point is kind of related to some things that I've mentioned already in point number 1. But I wrote down, how many times do we get to be in someone else's shoes, to see things from their perspective? Because that's how I felt like. I was very fortunate that I had a friend who is actually from Taipei, and she was so willing and so generous to show me her culture, show me the places where she grew up, show me the kind of foods that they have in the country. And I felt like my trip to Taipei was a little bit unconventional because I got to see Taipei through my friend's eyes. Like, she didn't do a very typical itinerary of, let's go to I think it's called the Taipei 101 Tower. Like, let's go to the Taipei 101 Tower, which is like a huge tower where you can like look out into the city. I didn't really have like a very conventional experience. Instead, I got to experience the cities through the places where she likes to eat, meeting her mom and having conversations with her and asking her, loads of questions. It was like having a personal tour guide. Like, I asked her so many questions about, the Taiwanese culture and the people, and there were so many things that I learned. And besides our collective love for design and art and creativity, like, I believe that my friend and I have also fairly different personalities, in a sense where, she is just completely so chilled out as a person. Like, she's so grounded. She has this sort of stillness and this wholehearted acceptance about the good and the bad. Like, that's how I felt like, like, we all have our flaws, right? And we all have things that we need to work on. But I just kind of felt like she was the kind of person who could be like, yeah, I could do a little bit better on that, but I know that, but it's okay. Like, I'm still okay. And being able to sort of experience that firsthand, and also myself being someone who, I put, and if you tune into these Teaside Thursday episodes and also my vlogs, like, you already know that I am someone who have a tendency to put a lot of pressure on myself, and I normally have high expectations, and this is something that I've actively been trying to work on this year. But sometimes when I try to figure stuff out by myself, like, it never usually works. But when I'm in the presence of someone who I feel like I can sort of almost like see the world through their eyes, it really helps me integrate the thing that I need to learn. So that was the case with me, like, being with my friend, like, being with her for 2 weeks. I kind of got to experience what it's like to live life with a little bit more self-acceptance and a little bit more, to be honest, like, overall enjoyment. Because when you stop trying to fix everything in your life, you actually start to enjoy it more, and you actually start to be more present in life. And I kind of felt like that with her. And this is part of the reason why I wrote, how many times do we get to be in someone else's world, to see things from their perspective? And I think it's especially amazing if in any place where you travel, it's great to actually engage with and to also have someone who is from that country. I would love to have more of these experiences like I had with my friend, where I had someone who, was generous to show me their culture and their way of living. And I learned so much, not only about her country, but also about her. And that is extra special to me. And that is the thing about, I think, traveling, especially traveling, I feel like, to two countries where no one hardly spoke like English. Even if they could, I found that because they realized that my friend could speak Mandarin and also Japanese, they actually resorted to speaking Mandarin in Taipei and Japanese in Fukuoka. So I was completely out of my depth, especially in Japan. Transport systems in Japan are so overwhelming, and that's another story for another Teaside Thursday episode. But it actually, like, took my ego down a notch. I'm very humbled, and I'm happy to have been humbled. And I'm also happy to be humble, because I feel like that's what you have to be. Like, you are in someone else's country, and, like, it's important to respect them and their culture. And I tried my best as much as possible to respect my friend's culture in Taipei and also the culture in Japan too. Like, there were a few things that I found it quite difficult, which I will share in a future episode. Overall, I realized that traveling to very unfamiliar countries made me develop more humility. I found out a lot about, especially in Japan, I found out a lot about the working culture there. And again, I think I'm going to expand more on it in a future Teesside Thursday episode where I'll be talking to you more about my trip in each of the countries in terms of, culture, religion, food, etc. I really want to do a deep dive on that. But coming back to my point, I found out more about like the working culture in Japan, but also I found out some things about the working culture in Taiwan too. And it made me realize also how good we actually have it here in the UK. Like, whilst we may complain about a lot of things here as British people, like we actually also have a lot to be thankful for. But at the same time, the humility also comes from the fact that going to Taiwan and Japan, they are such advanced countries in more ways than one. Like, I come from Myanmar, and in Myanmar, like a lot of people, I feel like look up to the West. Like they look up to England, they look up to America as like the holy grail of, like places that are like doing well, and you can sort of, have your American dream and have your have more freedom basically. And it is true, like no doubt that's true. But at the same time, I feel like when I stepped outside of the places that I know, I realized that countries in Asia are doing incredibly well. They have such organized transport systems. Both countries were so clean. Like England is not that clean. After coming back from, Taipei and especially Japan, I realized England is not that clean. So it's just, it it taught me a lot about humility in both the perspective of things that I can be grateful for with the life that I have right now, but also the fact that I don't know ish. I don't want to swear, but I know nothing, I know nothing about the world. And to go into new countries where I'm completely unfamiliar in makes me realize that I have a lot more to learn. I have a lot more things to see. I have a lot more things to explore and learn about. And to be honest, like I'd rather it was this way than feeling like I know everything and I've seen everything, which is obviously not the case. Like we only experience other countries through the news articles, through what the government say about other countries. Like, British government has things to say about other countries. I'm sure Japan and both Taiwan have a similar thing where they have their own stories that they tell about other countries in the world. But I feel like the the most honest experiences are when you actually step foot outside of your own country and into someone else's country, and you actually realize there are so many different ways of living, so many different ways of doing things in life, and there are so many different ways to approach life in general. And I learned that from being both in Taipei and Fukuoka, but also being with my friend. And I think that is what happens when you step outside of your own world and when you are willing and open to look at the world and almost even temporarily live the world from someone else's perspective. And again, similar to my first point, I think travel helps you do that in such a visceral way, more so than I think even from reading a book, reading a news article, reading or hearing what someone else has told you about a place like I'm doing. I think you've got to go out there, like you've got to actually go there. Being in Fukuoka and being in Taipei makes me realize that when, like the world is big, like the world is massive, and I might be in my own little world with my own little ideas, but I feel like my senses and also my mind and also like in my experience in my body feels so much more bigger than before I left. Like I feel like I got to touch a different part of the world. I will forever carry that place with me, and getting to experience a place from someone else's perspective is also great for me as an artist, because my world is limited by my environment. My world is limited by what I see online, by the people I follow. And a lot of the times I'm also, constantly observing what other artists are doing, how are they shaping their careers, and I always see certain kind of like ways of doing things, some which I agree with, some which I'm not sure about. Sometimes I always feel like in being in my own little bubble, being seeing on screen or even, in my immediate environment, like what people are doing, it kind of gets repetitive sometimes. And I'm probably also a repetitive person to begin with. I'm probably also, boring to someone else's perspective. But the great thing about, again, like stepping out, seeing even so many creative things by people makes me realize, gosh, like people are so creative. Like I would never have thought of doing things that way. I would never have thought of like putting this and this idea together. And that's not something that I experience like being online, or that's not something I experience when I scroll on my phone, or that's not something I experience even just in my day-to-day life. Like, so again, like it makes me realize you might have an idea. Like I might have an idea, but there are also 10 to 100 other ways of doing it. I'm just not seeing it. I just don't know it yet. I don't know. There's something beautiful about that. It makes me feel like, you know, life has expansive opportunities and expansive possibilities. And I personally don't know how also my professional artist career is gonna take shape in the future, but who knows, like if I ever get the opportunity to do like a residency, like an artist residency in either Taiwan or Japan, now that I've been to those two countries, like I would absolutely say yes. Like I would love to do that one day, and I'm kind of sending little wishes out into the universe that one day I will get the opportunity to partially live in any of these two countries or even somewhere else. But especially Asia. I have this sort of wanting to, be in Asia for a while and actually get to create there, to make art there, and see what happens. So look, like you never heard me speak about these sorts of things like in previous Teesside Thursday episodes, but this is how I think traveling to new places change you. I think all of a sudden, like I feel like the possibilities are endless, and all of a sudden, from physically traveling from here to there makes me realize it's possible. It's possible. So I am enjoying every single sip of that tea. And I can't say that a lot for some teas that I have had in these Teaside Thursday episodes. But that is a really darn good tea. Right. Last point is Again, I feel like this relates to the previous point that I just mentioned. Third point that I wrote is I realized it was time for a change. We don't know how we'll change. So let me unpack that for you a little bit if it sounded a little bit too abstract. So I guess now it's coming back full circle a little bit because I have been living in the same city and I have been living in the same house for the past 8 years, nearly 10 years now. And I'd always thought of myself as someone who would stay in like one place, like for a very long time and just stay there. And I know there might be some contradictions here because I told you that I enjoy traveling and I'm used to, traveling back and forth, for example, when I was young, traveling between England and Myanmar. But at the same time, you know, in in my upbringing, I learned that stability is good. Stability is good because when you come from like a country like Myanmar, for example, where politically it's not so stable or financially or professionally, like it's not so stable for young people to have like a lot of opportunities. Like when you come from a place like that and then you move to a new country like England, like you assimilate, you have to. And in that assimilation, I think as a family, like we try to seek as much stability as possible. So I've always been instilled with values of stability in a sense where, before pursuing my now profession as an artist, I thought that I was going to be a landscape architect for the rest of my life because my parents encouraged me to work towards this one profession so that I can be financially stable and also professionally stable. And it's a similar thing with even the company that I worked for. Like my family encouraged me to stay in the same company and never leave basically because they were I think I mentioned in a previous Teesside Thursday episode before, they are super nice people. They're amazing, kind-hearted people. Um, but this is a thing about individuation. And I think that traveling brings aspects of individuation in one's life. So, what I mean by that is when you all of a sudden step outside of your familiarity, places and people that are familiar to you, and you experience something like completely different, you bring back something from that country and from the people that you met, and a part of you change inside. And I think that the more we travel or the more we seek out new experiences, I think what happens is we continue to change and grow and evolve as a person to the point where sometimes you might reach thresholds in yourself where you realize that you are not the same person you were like 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And that is what I feel like I'm realizing is happening to me at the moment. I took a very big risk in pursuing this artistic career, and it's changed me for better or worse. It's changed me. And I, again, traveling to countries where I got to experience different ways of living and doing things have also changed me. And they are micro changes, but I think these micro changes add up year by year. And like I said, I think sometimes you begin to not recognize yourself. And sometimes when you start changing, you might blame yourself because that's what happened to me. Like, I thought that I was a bad person for not wanting to seek stability. I thought that I was a bad person for, wanting change in my life, like periodically. But then I realized that maybe it is just the person that I'm growing into right now, the person that is showing up, like, in my 30s is different from someone in my 20s. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, but this travel experience has definitely made me realize that I've also outgrown where I'm living. I've also outgrown the city that I live in, the house that I live in. We think that, just because we are of a certain age or just because we reached a certain level of threshold in our professional life or personal life, we think that maybe that is just where we're meant to be. But I actually think that there are always new territories and new boundaries and new possibilities that are available to us. But sometimes we don't know it because we are used to doing the same thing day in and day out, and we're used to being around the same environment and the same people potentially, like day in and day out. And whilst it may be nourishing for you, if you feel this sense of like exploration or this sense of like something's missing, like I don't know what it is, I think that traveling to somewhere that you've never been to before might actually do you some good, like it did me. I don't know if without doing this long distance travel, I would have felt brave to make a change. I hope that it makes sense. I'm going to summarize the three key takeaways for you again. So, number one, the more unfamiliar, the better. So, sometimes we might actually stick to going to countries that we already know the lay of the land in, and we already know like what's roughly, happening around the area and whatnot. But I think if we actually try to also keep an open mind to go to places that are more unfamiliar to us, like a different religion, a different culture, different foods, we might learn something completely different that might actually benefit us in our current existing environment. Number two, how many times do we get to be in someone else's world to see things from their perspective? This point is all about the fact that like traveling is great to practice humility, realizing that I don't know any of the languages in Taipei or Fukuoka, nor the culture differences, meant that I had to learn along the way. Traveling whilst respecting someone else's culture, whilst it may be a little bit stifling sometimes, can also be great because we might actually end up learning about what is good and what we like about the culture where we grew up, the places where we grew up. But not only that, it will also, I think, expand our perspective about the possibilities that exist, the different ways of living and doing that exist. And I think that expansion makes you a better informed person. I think being better informed means when it comes to making decisions for yourself, because you have that knowledge of how other countries do things, how other people live, how other people approach life and work and all that stuff. Like you can draw from those experiences and make a decision that is, I think, sometimes a little bit more unique, a little bit more creative, a little bit more outside of the box, and also make decisions that will benefit you in the long run. Whereas if you never try to see things from someone else's perspective, if you always just stuck to the same familiarity that you're used to, I feel like personally for me, like it gets boring to a certain extent because I'm just in my own thoughts. I'm just in my own kind of like, the things that are repeating in my head is pretty much mostly the same things like over and over again. And who needs that? Like, like I don't, I think we're boring people by ourselves, but I think when we let life like touch us, I think that's when we become more interesting as people. So that was my second point. And the third point is I realized that it was time for a change. We don't know how we'll change. And I guess this last point is all about like staying open minded. Your situation right now, you might not be happy with your current situation right now. You might feel stuck in where you live, but just know that that is not always going to be forever. As the years go on, like I think the best thing that we all can do for ourselves is to gather new experiences. And again, I'm advocating for travel because I think travel is a great way to gain new experiences and learn so many things about the world. But at the same time, just sort of feeling op- being open about what the world can teach us that is outside of where we grew up and the things that we were taught, I feel like can only be a good thing because I think that is when we also start individuating as a person. And that is also when we start to form our own kind of personality. We start to have more of an idea about what we like, what energizes us, where we are best placed, where we are the most happy. And again, just like with the previous 2 points, like having that sort of self knowledge can only benefit us. So, without rambling on again and again, I'm going to take the last few sips of my Hojicha tea and call it a day with this episode. So, thank you so much for joining me in this one. This was a little bit of like a mental reflection and download, and I hope that you gained a lot from the conversation as much as I think I also gained a lot from reflecting together with you. And if you have any takeaways or comments about what life has taught you, like please feel free to share it in the comments section. I would definitely love to know. And until next time, I will see you in a future Teaside Thursday episode. Bye. Another refrain. I sing this softly to myself. I sing this softly